Hi freshmen, I'm Mrs. Nance and I am going to take you through the next couple of letters in our acronym for learning how to write a paragraph, and those are cite and context. In the acronym, the context actually comes first, but in order to have context, we have to find the evidence first, and we call that the cite. So let's jump in and look at where we're going today. All right, so we've already worked on R and A, restating the prompt with language from it, answering it, and creating some reasons that would support a claim. And now we need to add some evidence. So again, you can see the second C is cite a piece of evidence. And then C is context. So context is kind of some background information. You know, we could sometimes replace this with a B, and I think if you're in read write, you may see that as a B as well. But for our purposes, we're going to keep it C, context. So let's jump right in with our first part, which is going to be the cite and finding a good piece of evidence to cite to support our answer. All right, so when we find pieces of evidence or kinds of evidence, types of evidence, three of the more common ones that you will see and that we'll practice with are direct quotations from text, paraphrases, and visual evidence. Direct quotations are the most common kind, the quoted sentences and phrases from written text. So I like these because it's concrete, and I can read an article and I can create an opinion or an answer, and I can just grab a piece of text and pop it into my paragraph to support my answer. So that's probably the most common and probably the most common one that you'll work with in an English class, and of course into your 10th, 11th, 12th grade years and into even your professional lives and college student lives. Another way to directly or to provide evidence to support a claim is to paraphrase an author's words, and that's really putting the author's own words into your own and also giving it credit. This is much more advanced of a skill because there's a difference between paraphrasing something and summarizing it. And so we'll have to continue to refine that skill, but just if you've done paraphrasing before and you've had some practice with it, we want to encourage you to try it. It's less concrete though, you know, it doesn't have the quote marks around it. It is simply capturing the author's voice in your own words, giving it credit, and it is difficult to do well. But we'll keep practicing it. And then finally, we'll practice with visual evidence. So when we look at art and murals and sometimes videos, we don't have quotes that we can pull from to support a claim. So we use the author's or the artist's visual cues. And sometimes that's colors or the way words are arranged on it. Dark versus light, what's in the front, what's in the back of the picture, and what message are we supposed to get from that picture based on the visual evidence available to us. So we'll practice with that. All right, when you add evidence to support an answer, you should cite it, okay? Otherwise, it's kind of a form of plagiarism. You're not saying that the other person's words are yours, but when you don't give credit to somebody else, it's kind of this lazy form of plagiarism that we want to avoid as much as possible. Readers want to know where you're getting your information from, so if they also want to pursue that text, they'll know who the author was and where to find it. You obviously are going to appear more smart and more researched when you provide parenthetical citations to support your claims. In English at Eagle Crest and at a lot of high schools, we practice the format of MLA style, but there are other styles that you'll encounter later in life. We practice MLA. So on the right-hand side here, I have 4 examples of how we cite things. These are ways we cite text that we'll see in the next few weeks as we're practicing these skills. And the first one is if we're citing a book. If we're citing a book, we'll pop a quote in there or a paraphrase or maybe even a piece of visual evidence if it's later down the list. And we just want the author's last name, okay? And then what page of the book did you find the quote on? So maybe it's August Wilson's book, Fences, and we found that piece of evidence on page 442. Okay, so we'll do author last name, page number. We are going to work with poetry here in a couple weeks, and when we cite lines from poetry, also want the last, the name of the author, his or her last name, and then what lines from the poem or song, if we're analyzing a song, did that quote come from, okay? If we're doing nonfiction and we want to cite an article or even sometimes a short story, it doesn't change. We want the author last name and the page number. Finally, if we're citing a visual, We want the author last name and the year that the piece of art is composed. Sometimes you don't always have that information, so you would just do what you have. So maybe it's a Banksy, that mural that we've looked at before. Okay, maybe you know that he created this in 2008, so you can put that there. Okay, if you don't know the artist name or you don't know the year, you could put the title of the mural or the piece of art in your parentheses as well, and no comment in MLA. Okay, so we have to give credit to the evidence that we're using. Another little detail to go with parenthetical citations, in-text citations, and this is a small detail, but we want to do things right, okay, is that when you format a citation and you add it to the end of a quote or a paraphrase or a piece of visual evidence, the period goes on the outside of the parentheses. It's a very tiny, minor detail, but we want to make sure we get it right. So here's a quote from John Steinbeck's book of Mice and Men. During the conversation, Carlson had refused to be drawn in, okay. That is wrong. That's a quote from the book. That's great. It's got quote marks around it, and it's a full sentence, but it's not cited properly. Okay, and that's why there's a big X by it. To do that more correctly, we would still put the quote marks around the direct quote, and we would say, during the conversation, Carlson had refused to be drawn in, parentheses, Steinbeck, found on page 47, period on the outside. Okay, there's some common ways to continue to not do this right. Okay, and I want to help you avoid those. Okay, so one of the ways that students do this incorrectly a lot of the time is they'll put a period after the quote and then they will cite it and put a period there. And now we have two periods, and that doesn't work. We also don't want the period on the inside. Okay, that's also wrong. We don't want a period on the inside of the quote, a period on the inside of the parentheses, and a period here. These are all incorrect. Okay, so even though in the book there's a period after the word in, we're not going to add the period until after the full citation. Okay, so that is a minor detail, but it's important to do it correctly. Okay, so if we were to put this all together with what we've come for so far with our sample prompt, sample question that I asked at the beginning of this group of mini lessons, is back to Simone Biles, right? We've been using that example frequently. So you've read this several times. Although there are conflicting views, my thoughts on Simone Biles dropping out of the competition for safety and mental health reasons are that she should have left the competition if she didn't feel safe, and that she is inspiring to young athletes to prioritize themselves above all else, which is admirable. So again, I've got my two reasons in my answer, and now I have to support it. I have to support my answer that I think she should have left if she didn't feel safe. So I found a quote from an article, and I want to pop this into my paragraph. Here's the quote. Getting a case of the twisties is a major health and safety concern, and gymnasts are at a severe risk of this condition. This is found in an article by the guy's last name is Gaglio on page 10 of an essay. And so I've got the period on the outside. It looks good. So this quote now supports my answer, and that's what we want. The problem is that the connection between the answer and the cite, there isn't much of a connection. Yes, this does support this answer, but I need something in between here to kind of bridge the gap between this first reason and this piece of evidence. And that's where our next letter of our acronym comes in. So we've got an answer, we've found a piece of evidence to support it, we've cited it correctly, okay, and now we're going to need some context, okay, and that's where we're going to move to next. Before we do the context, I do have some practice for us all to take part in. So if you're watching this video because you were absent on the day that this was given to you, then we've got some practice here for you, 3 practices for you to engage in. And it would be first to look at a visual, okay? We've got a question here that says, what message is the creator of this image suggesting about girls, okay? And so we've got these girls who are, like in shorts and sports bras, and we've got a variety of words that you need to read. And then it says stop bullying in red. So what stands out to you? These are visual cues, and that should help you come up with an answer to this question. What message is he trying to say about girls? My potential answer would be that girls are more than what people see on the outside. Great. Well, how do I know that? What evidence from this visual tells me that this is the answer to my question? Okay, so that's what you're going to work on. Next one is a short story, okay, by Yash Sedbagary, called The Sounds of Dysfunction. The prompt on this one is, how does a speaker show the impact of routine on their everyday life? And I came up with this answer. The everyday routines of everyday people can be isolating and disheartening. And if you were to read this, you would see some little clues that might show you that everyday routines are a little bit isolating and disheartening, right? We've got a short quote here. It tinkles like tears, regret, assaults, it's cold. A really short sentence that ends the short story. So I can tell that as I'm reading this that it's not a positive message. These routines that we go through are kind of grating and isolating. Doors slam, words crack. So I have text evidence to support this answer. Okay. All right, and there's another example here for you to practice with in class. Practice by looking at, if you have access to this as a Pear Deck, which students in class did. Okay, so we've got context now. We've got a restate, we've answered the question, we have found a piece of evidence with the in-text citation properly formatted, and now we have to bridge the gap between the answer and the citation. Okay, so how do we provide context or background knowledge for a piece of evidence? That's going to be our next task. All right, so we're backing up. We had done the C cite, and now we need to offer context. Okay, there's a lot of words on this slide, but it's pretty simplistic. You've located the evidence, right? You've done the cite. That's number one, okay? And then you need to provide background information, context from the text that introduces that evidence. So what article are you getting this from? Who's the author of this? Who is the guy who's offering us this piece of evidence? Writers need this information so that the reader of the paragraph knows what's happening in the world and where the evidence is coming from. You can't just drop in a quote without some background, some context. Okay, so some ideas for you to start this would be to include the author name of the text of wherever you got the citation from. What's the title of the text? Is it a short story? Is it a book that you're summarizing or reading and then summarizing? Is it a visual? When was it created? What kind of background information do we need to understand this evidence? What's happening in the world that makes this evidence relevant? Okay, that's another pretty stylistic way to introduce a piece of evidence. If you're reading a fiction book or a poem, sometimes we need a little summary. If I haven't read the short story, I need you to tell me what's happening in the story so that the evidence makes sense, right? Who's involved, what's happening, where is it happening, and just give us some of that context. Those who, what, where, when. Okay. So I did this for that piece of evidence I provided just a minute ago. Getting a case of the twisties is a major health concern and safety concern, and everyone's at risk. Okay, so to introduce this after my answer, I might say something like this. In the article, Why It's Important to Take Your Health Seriously, the author, Julian Gaglio, discusses the impact of mental confusion on physical performance. He writes that getting a case of the twisties is a major health and safety concern, all that. So I've chosen a few of these options, author name, title, and summary, to kind of bridge the gap between my answer and my citation. Okay, so we call this context. Some of your teachers might call this background. It's the same idea. Context is just placing it within a situation that we would want to know before we read the evidence. Okay. If I were to put it all together, it would look like this. Restate answer, some context, and then my citation. And now we're more than halfway through our full acronym of RACES or RACCES, however we're going to try to pronounce it. And now we just need to explain how the evidence proves our answer in our own words. But we've kind of done a lot of the hard work. I think the hardest part is answering the question effectively and then finding a great piece of evidence to cite it. Once you have the A and the C done, the context is kind of filler to help bridge the gap between these two ideas. Okay. On the last slide I have for you today, I have some ideas for sentence starters for context. These first two are more like, first 3 or 4 are kind of like what's happening in the book, maybe what's happening in the world that kind of sets the stage for this piece of evidence. You could start there. Other ones are, including the author. So author of the article blank claims what? And then add in your quote, your piece of evidence. Or according to this author, an expert on environmental impact or the environmental impact of plastic, right? If you're citing a quote from that kind of article, you could summarize it quickly and then offer the piece of evidence. Okay? All right, so to recap, we are focused today on finding evidence to support an answer, okay? And then going backwards and backtracking a little bit and adding some context. Who wrote the article? Why is it important? What's the summary of it before we go ahead and offer it as a piece of evidence? Next up will be how to explain the evidence in your own words and what's the significance of it, okay? Thanks for watching and good luck.